An old night janitor was assigned to the late shift, just like every other night. But when he heard the sound of crying coming from the locked administrative office, something deep within urged him to open the door. No one, not even him, could have predicted what waited on the other side. Briar Ridge Preparatory School at night looked like a painting suspended in time, still, glossy, and cold. Overhead lights cast a soft yellow glow along the winding corridors. The towering gray stone walls stood like fortresses built not to educate, but to guard secrets. Everything had fallen silent, as if the laughter and footsteps of students were just a dream from daylight hours. Only one person remained, Ray Cole. Ray was 62, the janitor. Every night, he pushed his cleaning cart down the halls in a rhythm as familiar as the beat of his aging heart. In 20 years on the job, he had scrubbed away more messes than he could count, but he'd never been able to wipe away the feeling that he was invisible. His ash-gray uniform was worn at the cuffs, creased at the knees, but spotless. He kept it clean the way one clings to dignity. The sharp tang of lemon-scented floor cleaner clung to his palms, mixing with the layer of dust that had made a permanent home in his lungs. Ray didn't complain, he was used to it. Beyond the glass doors, the school lawn shimmered under a coat of frost, and the bronze statues of the school's founders stood isolated, like shadows left behind by time. There was something in the stillness tonight that felt different. Navigated, not just empty, but hidden. Rick, the evening security guard, was getting ready to head out. Young, hurried, always half distracted, he clocked out with barely a glance around. On his way out, he clapped Ray lightly on the shoulder and tossed him a familiar line. "Quiet night." "She's all yours, Ray." Ray just nodded, eyes locked on the cart filled with his usual gear, rags, mop, trash bag. He pushed it toward the west hallway where the senior administration offices sat in silence, like a basement of forgotten prestige. At the end of the corridor, a faint light spilled from the gap beneath the door of the head administrator's suite, a room that was always locked after 6 p.m. And then he heard it, something faint. At first it sounded like the wind slipping through the cracks, but then there was rhythm, a tremble, a cry, soft, muffled, like pain swallowed inside four walls. Ray froze. Every sense in his body stirred awake from a long sleep. His ears strained into the silence. His heart slowed. No, that wasn't the wind. The sobs rose again, clearer this time, breaking apart, choked back, compressed like sorrow buried too deep, like someone who had been forgotten. Ray stepped forward, 1 foot at a time. Not fast, but steady. He was used to things being forgotten, but he had never grown used to the feeling of leaving them behind. The brass nameplate on the door gleamed, Head Administrator Suite. Ray placed his hand on the knob. Locked, of course. He knocked gently, his voice low and warm, calm, like he was speaking to a frightened bird. "Is someone in there?" No reply. But behind the door, he heard a breath catch, like someone had just tried to stop crying, afraid of being heard. Ray looked around. No footsteps, no buzz of machines. Just him and the crying, as if the entire world had paused to see what he would do. He inhaled deeply, reached down to his belt, and pulled out an old silver key ring. Just before slipping the key into the lock, he stood still, because in that moment he wasn't looking at a hallway anymore. He was looking at a memory. Years ago, there had been another child, also left behind, also in a dark room. And when Ray walked past that night, he had thought, "Not my business." That night he went home and didn't sleep a wink. He never saw that child again. This time, he wouldn't make the same mistake. The key slid into the lock and turned slowly. The bolt clicked open. The door eased ajar, and what he saw inside that room would change forever the world he thought he knew, not because it was horrifying, but because it hurt. A truth so raw, no one had bothered to look. He inhaled deeply. He reached down to his belt and pulled out an old silver key ring. Just before slipping the key into the lock, he stood still, because in that moment, he wasn't looking at a hallway anymore. He was looking at a memory. Years ago, there had been another child, also left behind, also in a dark room. And when Ray walked past that night, he had thought, "Not my business." That night he went home and didn't sleep a wink. He never saw that child again. This time, He wouldn't make the same mistake. Maybe the ones who seem unimportant are the only ones who can hear the screams inside the silence. Ray didn't know. He only knew that if he turned away now, he'd never be himself again. The room was dim, lit only by the soft yellow of a desk lamp, warm but lonely. Everything was perfectly arranged. A polished walnut desk, a tall black leather chair, and a cold, still-life painting crooked on the wall. But in the middle of that perfect order there was one thing that brought Ray to a standstill. A child. The boy sat curled up under the desk, arms wrapped around his chest, head bowed, messy blonde hair covering most of his face. His school uniform was wrinkled, tie crooked, blazer twisted halfway off his shoulder. On the floor beside him lay a tablet with a shattered screen and a few crumpled tissues. Ray said nothing. He knelt down slowly, gently, as if afraid to break something fragile. His knees cracked under the weight, but he didn't care. His heart skipped a beat at the sight. Painfully familiar, not because he'd seen Caleb before, but because he'd seen a child like this, left behind, and he hadn't turned back. "You okay?" he asked, voice soft as a breeze. The boy looked up, blue eyes glassy with tears. Not the stubborn tears of a child throwing a fit, but the quiet, worn-out kind. The kind that had been falling for a long time. He didn't answer. He just stared at Ray like he was trying to figure out if the man in front of him was even real. Ray didn't push. He eased back, settling onto the floor a few feet away, close enough to matter, far enough not to overwhelm. No questions. No chatter. He'd been a father once, only for 3 short years. His son had once looked at him with the same kind of eyes, pleading not to be interrogated, just to be heard. After a while the boy whispered, like he was afraid his voice might shatter the quiet. "I'm Caleb Morgan." "Hi, Caleb," Ray nodded. "I'm Ray." The boy gave the faintest nod, then looked back down. His shoulders trembled slightly, as if still unsure whether he was allowed to feel safe. Ray scanned the room. No backpack, no coat, no lunchbox, just a child left behind. No one asking, "You hungry?" Ray asked. Caleb nodded, narrowly, like if he nodded too hard the world would collapse and drag him back to that old rule. "Don't ask for anything." Ray stood, stepped out for a few minutes, then returned with a warm towel and a protein bar from his jacket pocket. He handed the towel to Caleb to clean his hands, then set the bar gently on the floor between them. Caleb picked it up, but didn't eat right away. He looked at Ray not with fear, not with gratitude, but with something else, hope. Small, fragile, but real. Ray rested his arms on his knees, watching. This boy didn't act like most kids. No tantrums, no wailing, no begging. Just silence, exhausted and tight. Like a little grown-up trapped inside a too small body. "I thought my dad would come get me," Caleb murmured. "After chess club." But no one came. Ray glanced at his watch. Cost 8 p.m. "Did you try calling anyone?" "My phone died. I waited, but everyone left. Nobody noticed." That last sentence cut deep. Nobody noticed. Ray had heard it before. Too often from adults, sure, but when it came from a child, it sounded like an indictment. A quiet verdict against the entire adult world. "Did any of your teachers know you were still here?" Caleb shook his head. "I'm not allowed to bother grown-ups unless my dad says it's okay." He said it like he was quoting a rule, one carved deep into his mind. Ray closed his eyes for a second. He stopped himself from sighing, didn't want Caleb to feel like he'd said something wrong. He just sat there, looking straight at the boy. "Well, I notice you now." The words weren't loud, weren't dramatic, but something shifted in Caleb's eyes. He didn't smile, but his gaze stopped trembling. His fingers tightened around the protein bar, not from hunger, but because it was the first thing anyone had brought him, not out of duty, but care. "Do you have a family?" Khaled asked, quietly. His voice was still soft, but now there was warmth. Ray smiled, a sad smile, but not a bitter one. "I did, once." Caleb nodded. He didn't press. Like he understood, like loss was something neither of them needed to explain. And that night, in a room built for power and administration, a forgotten child and an overlooked man sat together. Not as savior and victim, but as two people. One who had once been the child no one noticed, and one who still was, and for the first time in a long time, they were both allowed to exist, Ray gently guided Caleb to a small sofa in the corner of the teacher's lounge, the only place where the light was still on. On the table sat a glass of water and a now cooling warm towel. The boy sat still, not moving, his feet swinging slightly like he was trying to prove to himself he hadn't disappeared. Ray quietly cleaned the room, not because it was dirty, but because he needed something to do with his hands to stop them from shaking. He was used to being alone, but a child shouldn't be, not at that age. After a while, Ray returned to Caleb's side, about to speak, but the boy beat him to it, eyes still fixed away. "I'll get in trouble if grown-ups find out I talk to you." Ray paused. "When was that?" "My dad says I'm not supposed to get close to anyone who's not administration. If someone finds out I talk to a janitor, I'll lose my weekend privileges." Ray didn't answer right away. He bent down, refilled the glass with water, then said softly, "I think right now what you need more than a privilege is someone who listens." Caleb said nothing. His eyes were no longer wet, but they still held no light. Ray left the room. He walked straight to the school's main office, the reception area that always locked up after 6. This time, he didn't hesitate. His hand steady, unlocked the door and went straight for the student records. The files were organized alphabetically. Ray went to M. No, Morgan. He stopped, checked under C, then H. Nothing. In the very bottom drawer, shoved into the shadows, he found a thin folder, no cover, no label, just one file bent at the corners. The first page read, Caleb Morgan, student ID 417. No photo, no emergency contact, no medical info, no class roster, no homeroom teacher. Just one sheet with the school logo printed at the top, and below it a yellow sticky note, crookedly stuck on, with a scrawled, almost careless line of handwriting. Do not intervene. Private training, surveillance room only. Ray read the note again and again. Each word hit him like a blow to the chest. Do not intervene. Private training, surveillance. That's not how people talk about students. That's how they talk about property, about experiments. His mind flashed back to a memory he thought had been buried. Years ago, he'd heard screaming late at night from the auxiliary faculty room, a space locked tight after hours. A student had been taken in for academic violations. That boy had blonde hair, too, looked around 9. The next morning, no one said a word. Teachers looked away. A week later, the desk was cleared out. Ray hadn't asked questions. Back then, he told himself, I'm just the janitor. Now, standing in a room stacked with paper and silence, he couldn't afford to stay quiet any longer. Soft footsteps behind him snapped him out of it. Caleb stood in the doorway, leaning against the wooden frame. What are you doing here? He didn't accuse. He was just afraid. Ray slid the file behind his back. It's trying to find a way to call your parents. Caleb shook his head. You can't. My dad doesn't take calls from the school. He has his own rules. Ray sat down in the nearest chair, waiting. Caleb stepped inside, eyes scanning the room. Then, suddenly he pointed to the corner, where a small security camera sat. When is it still working? Ray followed his gaze. The camera's light wasn't on, but the question made the hairs on his neck stand up. Are you afraid you're being watched? Caleb nodded, his hands clenched so tightly they turned white. He didn't answer right away, and barely above a whisper. Sometimes I think I'm part of some experiment. No one really looks at me, but every move I make gets recorded. If I smile wrong, stay quiet wrong, or don't greet the right person, they send me to the reflection room. Ray's grip on the file tightened. That ache in his chest grew sharper. He'd always thought schools like Briar Ridge were just playgrounds for the rich. Now he realized some kids here didn't get to play. They were programmed. He looked around the room and for the first time really noticed cameras were mounted in nearly every corner. Not just in the office, right in the halls, even classrooms. Places he once thought were about safety now felt like cold, watching eyes. He stood up, his voice low, steady, but edged with steel. Caleb, do you remember your homeroom teacher's name? The boy shook his head. They may change all the time. A new one every week. They don't really talk to me. Just give me work, test me, and leave. Ray looked back at the file, then at the boy. Suddenly all the years he'd spent quietly sweeping these halls felt darker, as if he'd just been cleaning the stage for a game of power, more corrupt than anything he'd ever imagined. He folded the file, tucked it into his coat, and looked at Caleb. We'll figure this out, but for now, you need to rest. You're safe now, I promise. Caleb nodded gently, and for the first time he moved closer on his own. He didn't hug, he didn't take Ray's hand. He just stood beside him, a small gesture that carried the weight of a universe of trust. Ray placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, steady, like the heavy wooden doors he'd once repaired with his own hands. Ray stood by the narrow doorway, eyes fixed on the night sky as if searching for an answer in the silence. Inside, Caleb had fallen asleep on the chair, head tilted to one side, lips softly murmuring, as if still dreaming. That child didn't belong here, not swallowed up by these cold walls. The file was still in Ray's pocket, thin, weightless, yet heavy as stone on his chest. The words "do not intervene" echoed over and over in his mind, like orders from some invisible authority. He could walk away, just like all the other times, go back to his little apartment, wash his hands, sleep it off, and show up in the morning to polish the floors like nothing happened. But he knew if he did that Caleb would vanish. No one would ask, no one would look. The boy would go back to private training, back to the reflection room, back to being a pawn in the cruel game grown-ups like to call leadership development. And Ray, just an old janitor, would spend the rest of his life buried in a silence bigger than time. He walked over to the dusty landline phone in the lounge. He lifted the receiver, hand trembling slightly, and dialed the operator. A female voice came through. "Hello, City of Greenville Dispatch?" Ray swallowed hard. "Please connect me to Child Protective Services." "Certainly. Hold, please." He gripped the phone like a soldier holding a rifle. The line clicked. Hold music played distant and soulless. "Youth Welfare Services. How can I help you?" Ray took a breath, then spoke slowly, each word measured and sharp. "I'm calling to report a case of neglect and what looks like severe emotional abuse. A student, maybe 9 years old, was locked inside a school overnight. No pickup, no parent contact, no medical records. What's the child's name?" "Caleb Morgan, Briar Ridge School." "Are you a relative?" "No, I'm the night janitor, but the boy, he trusts me." Silence on the other end. "Abid, what's the school's address?" Ray gave everything. No hesitation, no excuses. "Can you stay with him until we arrive?" "I'm not leaving his side." "But..." Ray looked out the window, his voice low and firm. "Please, come quietly. Don't scare him more than he already is." He set the receiver down. His hands were still shaking, but now it was adrenaline, not fear. A decision was made. There was no going back. When he turned around, Caleb was still asleep. The boy's face looked peacefully exhausted, like this was the first time he'd ever slept without a bell to wake him or a camera watching. Ray sat down and slowly pulled the file from his pocket again. He looked at it one more time. Every sentence read like a scar. "Surveillance room only. No permanent staff assigned. No personal relationships allowed. Commands written by humans, but enforced like code for machines." He didn't know everyone behind this system, but he knew one thing for certain. If no one ever starts saying no, the machine will never stop. The back door creaked open without warning. Ray shot to his feet. A young man's silhouette, Rick, the security guard, stepped in, holding a ring of keys and a flashlight. "Mr. Ray?" "Why's the door open?" Rick frowned. "I thought you'd left." Ray stood steady, the file gripped tight behind his back. "I had something I needed to finish." Rick scanned the room. His flashlight swept across the walls, then landed on Caleb, still sleeping. "Feeling invigorated?" "Was the student?" Ray nodded. His voice was soft but solid as stone. "The boy was left behind. I've called Child Protective Services. Don't interfere." Rick frowned. "You know the rules. This isn't your call to make." Ray stepped forward, not threatening, not raising his voice, just a man who'd lived long enough to understand. Sometimes silence is a crime. "I know, but rules weren't made to justify abandoning kids." Rick hesitated, then gave a faint nod. "I didn't see anything." He backed away, turned his flashlight elsewhere. "I've got to check the fire alarm system." "Random check." Ray nodded. He didn't say thank you, just stood there, watching him go. And in that moment he understood. Even in the coldest machines, there are still people who quietly choose to do the right thing, even if just for a moment. Outside, the distant glow of red and blue lights began to appear, silent as ghosts in the night. And Ray, the old janitor, was no longer just a man with a mop. He was the line between silence and courage. When the police car and child services vehicle pulled up to the gates of Briar Ridge just before midnight, everything unfolded in silence. No sirens, no flashing lights, just steady footsteps, professional, deliberate. Ray opened the side entrance, guiding them in through the auxiliary hallway, where the flickering yellow bulbs gave the place a strange warmth, like grief trying to glow. Caleb was still asleep, his breathing slow and even. When the social worker knelt beside him and gently touched his shoulder, Ray leaned in and whispered first, "They're here to help. You're okay." "I'm right here." Caleb opened his eyes. The first place his gaze landed was on Ray, not with fear, but to check, to make sure the old man was still there. And when Ray nodded, Caleb finally nodded too. The worker took notes, asked a few simple questions. Caleb answered just enough, no more. He didn't cry, he didn't smile. He was a child who had learned to survive in silence. Ray handed over the file. He left nothing out. The woman in the state uniform frowned as she read the note. "Do not intervene." "Where did you find this?" "In an unmarked cabinet," Ray said, eyes fixed on the file. "Buried among hundreds of names, maybe all forgotten too. You know this could cost you your job." Ray nodded. "I've already lost a child. Once is enough." The answer made her stop writing. Her gaze softened. She turned to Caleb. "We're going to take you to a temporary place, somewhere safe. Is there anything you want to bring with you?" Caleb shook his head, then looked at Ray. The old man stepped forward, lowered himself to eye level. "You're going to be okay. They'll take care of you, and I won't let this end in silence." Caleb reached for his hand, and small, but it was the first time anyone had touched Ray, not out of duty, but permission, a request to trust. The door closed behind them as they left. Ray remained in the empty schoolyard, the night wind slipping through his collar, carrying a feeling that was somehow both sorrow and peace. And he had handed the boy to someone who could protect him. But in his heart, he knew the real fight was just beginning. The next morning, Briar Ridge woke to chaos. The story spread fast, not by rumor, but by proof. A photo of the "Do Not Intervene" note leaked online. A local reporter ran the first headline: "Boy left overnight at elite school, janitor is only one who spoke up." Within 2 hours, the news hit the city. Within 6, it went nationwide. An emergency meeting was called. The administration dodged the press. A representative from the Department of Education was sent in. Cameras started coming down, but it was too late. The world had seen. Ray stayed home, still wearing his old uniform, the morning paper in hand. His name was printed across the front page. It's Ray Cole, the janitor of conscience. The phone rang nonstop. Friends, strangers, reporters. Some wanted interviews. Some called to apologize. 3 years of walking past him in the halls. Some were former students, sending messages like, "I used to be another Caleb." The story spread even farther. An investigative journalist reopened the school's old files. Anonymous letters that had once been dismissed. Stories of students being removed from class for behavior correction. A buried email from a fired teacher. "I warned them. No one listened." This was no longer about one child. It was about a system. That morning, teachers stood scattered across the schoolyard, stunned. Some quietly walked away, skipping the all-staff meeting. Others sat in their cars, crying. From guilt, from fear, or from the unbearable weight of their long-held silence finally being exposed. In one classroom, a young teacher placed a piece of chalk on her desk, but she didn't teach. She opened her phone and read the headline, "Elite School Used Isolation Tactics to Force Student Reflection." Out back, a group of parents gathered. One furious mother shouted, "I saw my child change, get quiet, afraid of the dark. And I thought it was normal." His father beside her lowered his head. "We chose reputation over humanity." That afternoon, Ray walked into the local news station, not for fame, but because he knew if he didn't speak, someone else would twist the story. In a modest studio, the lights fell on his face, not the face of a hero, but of a man who had walked through pain and finally chose not to stay silent. "How many did you do it?" the host asked. Ray looked into the camera. "No theatrics, just truth, because that boy is real. And sometimes doing the right thing doesn't require permission. As daylight flooded the hallways of Briar Ridge, it didn't just illuminate the pristine white walls. It exposed the shadows that had been hiding for years. News crews swarmed the school like a hive unleashed. Every camera, every microphone pointed at the iron gates where the name Briar Ridge Academy stood in raised letters. Once a symbol of prestige and power, it was now tied to words like secrecy, abuse, inhuman. Ray stood behind the fence, watching from a distance. He didn't want the spotlight, but he couldn't look away. The people he'd once called colleagues, teachers, administrators, were now caught in the storm of truth. A press conference was held in the schoolyard. Board spokesperson appeared, face tight, voice shaking. "We apologize for the failures in oversight and management. We are fully cooperating with the authorities to investigate and address the consequences." But apologies weren't enough to quiet the outrage. Parents gathered at the gates, holding signs. "Children are not experiments. We want justice for Caleb." A middle-aged father nearly screamed through tears. "My son was locked in a room just for a spelling mistake. I thought that was discipline." On social media, the hashtag Justice for Caleb went global. People from all over shared the story, expressed outrage, demanded transparency. Child advocacy organizations spoke up, calling for a full government investigation into the private education sector. Some politicians began drafting new legislation, laws that would require private schools to disclose all disciplinary policies and student monitoring procedures. Meanwhile, Caleb was placed in a specialized trauma recovery center. He still spoke little. His eyes still carried a depth of sadness. But for the first time, he is allowed to draw. And in his drawings, he sketched a man with a broom, standing in a field of flowers, holding hands with a small boy. Ray received a letter from the center, the handwriting wobbly but careful. "Dear Mr. Ray, thank you for not leaving me. I'm learning to trust grown-ups again. I hope one day I can see you and give you my drawing." Caleb, tears rolled down Ray's face. He sat with the letter in his hands, as if each word weighed more than the uniform he had worn all his life. He whispered to himself, "This time I didn't stay silent." A few days later, a media firestorm erupted. A former teacher, anonymous, released a trove of internal documents, emails, meeting notes, assignment list labeled behavioral observation and individualized conditioning for a hand-picked group of students. The program was called Genesis, a secret initiative funded by a circle of wealthy parents, aimed at forgiving leadership and absolute discipline from an early age. Behind the mask of elite education, children like Caleb had been isolated, monitored around the clock, and punished with chilling methods: solitary confinement, food denial, and total emotional detachment. The most shocking detail, at the top of the sponsor list, Richard Morgan, Caleb's biological father, a billionaire known for his philosophy. Absolute discipline builds absolute success. But after the scandal broke, Richard disappeared from public view. Rumor had it he flew to Switzerland the night the news hit. His social media accounts were deactivated. His company lost hundreds of millions in just 72 hours. Meanwhile, another name emerged unexpectedly: Lydia Morgan, Caleb's mother, who had lost custody in a shadowy court ruling years before, and she stepped into the spotlight. Speaking at a press conference with a voice that trembled but didn't break, "I stayed silent for too long. My son is not an investment. He is a child, and the only person who ever treated him like a person was Mr. Ray, the janitor." The room erupted. People wept openly. Lydia asked for no money, filed no lawsuits to restore her name. He simply said, "I want to regain custody of my son, and I want Mr. Ray to be allowed to stay close to him. He's the only person my child trusts." After the Genesis program was exposed, Briar Ridge Academy became the center of a nationwide investigation. Government agencies stepped in, with staff and administrators being questioned en masse. Some were charged with child abuse, human rights violations, and complicity in a system that had isolated young children under the guise of education. Meanwhile, Richard Morgan, Caleb's father and primary funder of the program, faced massive public backlash. Brands cut ties. A major investment group pulled out completely. In the media, his image shifted overnight from a symbol of success to a cautionary tale of power gone rotten. At the same time, Lydia Morgan, once silenced and pushed out of her son's life, won back full custody in a public court hearing, backed by psychologists, former school staff, and Ray himself. Caleb was relocated to a quieter, peaceful town to live with his mother. At his new school, he was welcomed like any other child. No cameras, no locked doors, no more reflection in isolation. That first night at their new home, Lydia made him a warm glass of milk, folded his blanket just right, and whispered, "You have the right to just be a kid." The words broke him, not from fear, but because it was the first time he felt safe. At the same time, Ray became a quiet icon in the public's mind. He didn't speak much, didn't become an ambassador, but he was invited to forums on fair education, ethics and discipline, and the unseen power of school workers. The silent authority of those who keep institutions running while being ignored. A year later, at a community heroes ceremony held by the city, Ray showed up in his light gray suit, old but pressed, and worn leather shoes freshly polished. The seats were packed. In the front row, Caleb sat next to his mother. When the name Ray Cole was called, he stepped onto the stage to a long standing ovation. The host asked, "And do you see yourself as a hero?" Ray looked at Caleb. Ben answered in his warm, steady voice, "I don't think so. I just saw a forgotten child and couldn't walk away." He paused, then added, "There are so many like me. The janitors, the gods, the drivers, the ones who see everything but are told they're not important. But here's the truth. We say, and sometimes we remember longer than those sitting up high." Caleb stepped onto the stage and handed him a drawing he'd made. In it, a gate stood wide open. A man with a broom stood beside a smiling boy. Above them stretched a sky, empty of cameras. He hugged Ray, didn't say a word, but the entire room fell silent from emotion. After the scandal, the government passed sweeping reforms for private school oversight. All gifted development programs were reviewed. Child welfare representatives were now required on oversight boards. Any form of student isolation had to be transparently reported to parents. A foundation named Raise Light was established, offering protection and reporting support for school workers, janitors, bus drivers, kitchen staff who witnessed wrongdoing but feared losing their jobs. As for Briar Ridge Academy, it was no more. The school was shut down and the grounds repurposed into a community center called the New House, complete with an open library, children's play areas, and evening learning programs. At the entrance stood a small bronze statue. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't large, but it made people stop. A man in a simple uniform reaching down to hold the hand of a small child. Beneath it, a simple engraving read, "For those who speak up. No child is ever forgotten." Ray didn't attend the opening ceremony. He wasn't fond of crowds or cameras, but he watched from a park bench nearby, a new letter from Caleb in hand. This time an invitation to dinner. "I've learned how to bake now. This time I made enough for both of us." Ray chuckled, quietly but deeply. 1 year after the Briar Ridge scandal, the once prestigious schoolyard had transformed into the New Light Center, where the echoes of cold, rigid footsteps had been replaced by the laughter of children and warm greetings from every corner. A small bronze statue marked the entrance. Not grand, not glowing, but powerful enough to make anyone pause. A man in a janitor's uniform bent down to hold the hand of a child, and at the base, carved deep into the metal, "For those who speak up, so no child is ever forgotten." Ray Cole wasn't there that day. He didn't need to be. He didn't like crowds. He never asked for credit, but he watched from afar. And in his heart, the memory of that night, the moment he opened that door and found a trembling boy alone in the dark, remained as vivid as if it had happened just yesterday. Now Ray works at the very center that once bore his story. He no longer wears a maintenance badge. He's the game coordinator, the storyteller, and sometimes simply the one who listens. Children come from all over, some abandoned, some survivors of violence, some just looking for a place that feels safe. To them, Ray isn't a media hero. He's just Mr. Ray, the one who knows how to make cocoa just sweet enough, who remembers every birthday, and who never ever yells. Caleb, now 10 lives with his mom, in a small house by the woods. He goes to school regularly, takes weekend art classes, and once a month he visits Ray. They play chess, draw, and sometimes just sit together in silence. Not the kind of silence that hurts, but the kind that heals. One late afternoon, Caleb arrived with a blue backpack. He pulled out a handmade picture frame and handed it to Ray. "I drew this for you. You're standing in front of a big open gate, and behind you there's light." Ray took it in his hands, studied it for a long time. The drawing was simple, but something in it caught in his chest, tight and aching. "Is that my dream you drew?" he asked. Caleb nodded. "Nah, it's our dream, all of us. Every kid needs someone like you, to an open gate, someone who doesn't walk away." Ray pulled him in and held him close, tight. He'd stayed silent through so much in his life, but that one time, he hesitated in that choice, had created a change even he hadn't expected. On the walls of the center, small slips of paper began to appear, whispers of hope left by the kids. One wrote, "I want to be a teacher who doesn't yell when kids spell wrong." Another said, "I won't lock the cat in the closet again, because I used to be locked in one too." And Caleb left just one quiet line, "I'll be the key holder, so no one gets left behind." That night, Ray stood alone after his shift, looking out the window at the field beyond. The sunset painted the trees in hues of fire. A gentle breeze rolled in, lifting the cloth draped over his shoulder. He leaned softly on his old broom and smiled. "Not everyone's meant to do something great," he thought. "Feel better if I can be steady enough. Maybe some small hand out there will choose to hold on."